right, this video is part 2 of lesson 9-4, solving quadratic equations by completing the square. So in part 1, we talked about how to actually complete the square. In this video, we're going to talk about applying completing the square to actually solve a quadratic equation for x, right? Before, when we would factor, we would just set the whole thing equal to 0 and factor, right, and solve for x that way. But now this is a little different. So the equations you're going to see now, because in a normal polynomial that you can factor to solve for x, they're a trinomial, right, typically, unless it's difference of squares. So you have an x squared term, an x term, and a plain number. In this worksheet, you're going to see them either look like this, where instead of the plain number being at the end of this whatever, they've moved it to the other side. Or you'll see it here with this entire trinomial, and you have to move it to the other side if it's not already there. You need to get rid of that c. We don't want whatever that number is unless it's a perfect square. We want to get a perfect square trinomial, so we need to figure out, we learned in the last video, how to figure out what c needs to be for this to be a perfect square. So if it already gives you a number there, get rid of that number and come up with your own. Okay, so here, the steps to solving. Here, we'll zoom in a little. Step 1 is to find b divided by 2 and then square it. That's step 2. And then add it to each side of your equation once you've moved c over. Because remember, if we're going to add something to this, if we're adding b divided by 2 squared here, and now we have an equal sign, whatever I do to this side, I have to do the same thing over here. So if I add this over here, I have to add it on the other side as well to keep them equal, all right? So they give us an example here. And our example is this x squared plus 6x plus 3 equals 10, okay? So they actually have a c here, but then they also have a number here. 3 is not a perfect square, plus we don't want numbers, that we don't want two different c values, right? So we need to get rid of this 3. So what they did was they got rid of it by subtracting 3, and whatever they did on this side of the equal sign, they did over here. So this 10, when I subtract 3 from both sides, this 3 goes away, and this 10 becomes a 7. So now we're here, and this is what we want. X squared plus bx equals c. Now we can come up with our own c value here by completing the square. So in the next step, that's what they did. They took the middle term, this b value, or the number in front of x, this b value, divided by 2, and then squared it. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 3 squared is 9. So on the end of this, they added 9. And so on the other side of the equal sign, since they added 9 here, they did the same thing over here. So 7 plus 9 becomes 16. And over here, since this is a perfect square trinomial, they went ahead and factored it, right? X squared, square root of x squared is, square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 9 is 3, and x times 3 times 2 is 6. So that works. Perfect square trinomial. Now, I can take the square root of both sides. And remember, 16, the square root of 16, could be negative 4 or positive 4, because positive 4 times positive 4 is 16, and negative 4 times negative 4 is 16, okay? So this squared cancels out with this square root, and we're just left with what's under the square root symbol, which is x plus 3. And then the square root of 16 is either positive or negative 4. So then they go ahead and separate it. Oh, this is the answer they get when they just solve for x. And then they go ahead and separate it out, and they say, okay, negative 3 plus 4 equals x, and negative 3 minus 4 equals x. So here and here. And then they go ahead and solve for x all the way. Negative 3 plus 4 is 1. Negative 3 minus 4 is negative 7. So the two solutions for x in this equation are 1 and negative 7, which they wrote here. Okay, lots of steps. Not a whole lot of new stuff other than completing the square. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 problems to do with you guys. I'm going to do it on my own paper, and I'll tell you which numbers I'm doing, but we're gonna solve. Okay, so I'm going to start with number 1 here. Number 1 is x squared. Here, I'll make sure you know which one it is on your worksheet. x squared minus 4x plus 3 equals 0. Okay, so this is the one we're going to use completing the square. 3, the c value, is not a perfect square, so we need to get rid of it. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. And whatever I do on one side, I have to do to the other. Feels like a no-no, right? Because when we were factoring before, we wanted 0 over here. Now we're getting rid of 0 and throwing a plain number in, but that's how to complete the square. X squared minus 4x equals negative 3. Okay, so now I have to add in another c over here to complete my perfect square trinomial, right? So I'm going to take the middle term, divide it by 2, and square it, and add it onto the end. So x squared minus 4x plus, this is a negative 4, so negative 4 divided by 2 squared. And then whatever I do on one side of my equation, I have to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to add negative 4 divided by 2 squared. Right? So this is where I'm at with completing the square. I just added in a completely new term, but because I added it on both sides, it still balances the scale. Both sides are still equal. So now I can simplify and factor, right? So this is actually x squared minus 4x. This is negative 2 squared is 4. And since that's 4, negative 3 plus 4 is 1. Okay, and then I know since this is a perfect square trinomial that I can rewrite this as x plus 2 squared. Right, I could just factor it, right? Square root of the first term, square root of the second term. If I multiply these, oh, this should be a minus. Good thing I checked it. That should be a minus sign, sorry guys. If I multiply these by 2, or sorry, together and then multiply it by 2, I get negative 4x. Make sure you do that. Check your signs. I almost got that wrong. Okay, so now I've got x minus 2 squared equals 1. I can take the square root of both sides here. This 2 cancels with the radical, so I'm just left with x minus 2 equals, and then the square root of 1, oops. The square root of 1 is either positive or negative 1. Right? So if I solve for x all the way, I get x equals, I'm going to add 2 onto this. So I get positive or negative 1 plus 2. So now to solve for x completely, because that's the whole goal here, I'm solving here, I'm going to separate this into x equals positive 1 plus 2 and x equals negative 1 plus 2. So 1 plus 2 is 3, x is going to equal 3. Negative 1 plus 2 is 1, so x can equal 1. So my solution set is 3, 1, or I guess I should have wrote 1, 3. And I hope that made sense. I think I'm too zoomed in a little bit. Okay, so that was the first one. You can go back and watch it if you missed anything. Next one we're going to do is number 7. Number 7. Let me switch this so it's not crooked. All right, for number 7, we have x squared plus 8x equals 20. Fantastic, it's set up just how we need it to be, right? I don't have to move this c value over, it's already moved. So now I gotta figure out what's gonna go on the end of this binomial to make it a perfect square trinomial. So I'm gonna have x squared plus 8x plus, and I'm going to take that middle term, divide by 2, and square it. Right? And since I added it here on the left, I got to do the same thing on the right. I added 8 divided by 2 squared. Then I can simplify the whole thing. X squared plus 8x plus 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared is 16 equals, since I know that 16, 20 plus 16 equals 36. Right? So now I know this is a perfect square trinomial, so I can go ahead and factor it. It's got plus signs, so I know it's a plus in here. And square root of the first term, square root of the last term. If I multiply these together and then multiply them by 2, I get 8x. Fantastic. Then I want to take the square root. This cancels with this, so I'm left with x plus 4 equals, square root of 36 is either positive 6 or negative 6. So either one of these. And I want to get x completely by itself, so I'm going to have x equals positive or negative 6 minus 4. Right? So my last step here to completely solving for x is just to separate it into these two equations. So I'm going to have 6 minus 4 or negative 6 minus 4. X equals. Okay, so if I combine this, 6 minus 4 is 2. And combine this, x equals negative 10. So in my solution set, I'm going to have negative 10 comma 2. That's what x could be. And I figured that out here by completing the square, right? You can't just look at that and tell. Okay, next one I want to do is number 8. I'm going to sheet of paper. Can you see the top right there? Okay, good. Number 8 says x squared equals 2x plus 1. All right, so this is a little wonky because we want the 2x to be over here with x squared, right? And I just want this 1 by itself. So I need to get rid of 2x over here. And whatever I do on one side, I got to do to the other. So these cancel. And I'm left with x squared minus 2x equals 1. That looks better. That's what I want. Okay, so now I've got these two terms. I want to add a third term to make this a perfect square trinomial. Okay, so I'm going to have x squared minus 2x plus, and I'm going to take this term, divide it by 2, and then square it. And whatever I do on one side of the equation, I got to do the same thing to the other side of the equation. And then I can simplify. So this is x squared minus 2x. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared is 1. And 1 plus 1 is 2. Okay, so far so good. And I know this is a perfect square trinomial. So I can go ahead and factor it, right? There's a minus sign here. So I know I'm going to have a minus sign here. Square root of the first term, square root of the last term. If I multiply these together and times 2, I get negative 2x. Fantastic. So then I go ahead and take the square root of both sides, and these cancel, so I'm left with x minus 1 equals positive or negative. I don't want to use my calculator here, so I'm just going to leave it as a radical. It's going to be either the positive square root of 2 or the negative square root of 2, right? Excuse me. I don't know which one it's going to be. So I'm just going to leave it, right? So then I add 1 to both sides. So I'm going to have x equals positive or negative square root of 2 plus 1. So then if I wanted to go ahead and solve for x, and I'm not going to do it completely, you can if you have your calculator, I'm going to say x equals positive square root of 2 plus 1, or x equals negative square root of 2 plus 1. The negative's outside the radical, so it works. Okay? And then you can use your calculator to figure out what the square root of 2 is and actually add those together. Same thing here, what the square root of 2 is, and then stick a negative sign in front of it and then add a 1. Right? Once you come up with those two numbers, you can stick them inside the solution set, but that's how you would get them. All right, next problem. That was number 8. We're going to do number 9. I know this video is a little lengthy, but this is kind of a weird thing, right? So I want you to have plenty of examples to look at home. Number 9, x squared plus 20x plus 11 equals negative 8. Okay, so here I've got two different c values, right? And I don't want any on this side of the equation. First of all, 11's not a perfect square. And second of all, even if it was, I can't make this 0 without adding it here, and then it wouldn't be a perfect square, right? So I want to kind of combine these, and I want to get rid of this guy on this side. I want to come up with what number needs to go here to be a perfect square. Okay, so I'm going to subtract 11, and I'm left with x squared plus 20x plus nothing, they cancel, equals negative 19. Okay, so now I'm going to add in 20, oh, this is supposed to be next, 20 divided by 2 squared to both sides. So x squared plus 20x plus middle term divided by 2 squared equals negative 19 plus 20 divided by 2 squared. Okay, so far so good. So now I can simplify. X squared plus 20x plus 20 divided by 2 is 10. 10 squared is 100. Negative 19 plus 100 gives me 81, positive 81. And I know that 81 is a perfect square, so this is going to be an easy answer. So now this is a perfect square trinomial. That's what I got after I completed the square. So when I factor it, there's a plus sign here, so there's going to be a plus sign in my binomial. Square root of x squared is x. Square root of 100 is 10. X times 10 times 2 is 20x, so all that works. Then I keep going, take the square root, take the square root. This cancels with this, so I'm left with x plus 10 equals, and the square root of 81 is either going to be positive 9 or negative 9. So then I keep solving for x. I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides. Positive or negative 9 minus 10, and then I just separate it. X is going to equal positive 9, minus 10, or x is going to equal negative 9 minus 10. So that's going to be a negative 1 or a negative, what's supposed to be 10? 19. So my solution set would be negative 19, comma, negative 1. Okay, hopefully that's making sense to you, okay? That was number 9. Got 2 more left to go. Number 13 is going to be our next one. X squared plus 10x equals 24. Okay, so this is how we want it set up, right? We don't want this 24 over here. We want to get rid of it. It's not a perfect square. We want to add our own term over here that would make this a perfect square trinomial. So I get x squared plus 10x plus, and then that term I'm going to add is the number in front of x divided by 2 and squared. And since I added it on the left side of my equation, I have to add it to the right side. That's going to keep both sides equal. Then I can simplify. X squared plus 10x plus 10 divided by 2 is 5. 5 squared is 25. 24 plus 25 is 49. And you can kind of see where this is going because that's a perfect square. So now I want to factor. They have 2 plus signs, so I know when I factor in my binomials will be a plus sign. And square root of the first term is x. Square root of the last term is 5. I'm going to go ahead and take the square root of both sides. This 2 cancels with the sign, and I'm left with x plus 5 equals positive or negative 7. Okay, then I want to subtract 5 from both sides. X equals positive or negative 7 minus 5. Okay, so then I want to separate these and see if I can solve for x. X equals positive 7 minus 5. X equals negative 7 minus 5. Okay, so x is either going to equal 2 or x is going to equal negative 12. In my solution set, I'm going to have negative 12, comma 2, and that's the work I did to get it. Okay, last one, number 18. I hope this is giving you a lot of good material to work with. All right, for number 18, we have 4x squared equals 40x plus 44. Okay, so first thing, and you haven't had a problem yet that required this, but first thing we notice is that the number in front of x squared here is not 1. It's not. So first thing I got to do is make it a 1. I cannot complete the square if there's a number in front of x squared. So I'm going to divide this side of my equation by 4, and that means I have to divide this side by 4. Okay, and these 4s just go away since I'm dividing both sides by 4. So these cancel, and I'm left with x squared equals 40x divided by 4 is 10x. 44 divided by 4 is 11. Next thing I want to do is move this term over here. So I'm going to subtract 10x to get rid of it. And I got to do the same thing here. So I've got x squared minus 10x equals 11. Fantastic, that's what I want. Now I need to add in a third term to make this a perfect square trinomial. So x squared minus 10x plus, and then I'm going to take that negative 10 here in front of the x, divide by 2, and square it. And I got to add the same thing on the other side of the equal sign. Okay, so when I simplify this, I'm almost done. Remember, it's the last problem. It was getting boring. 10, y'all are like, it's just getting boring. It's been boring. All right, negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. Negative 5 squared is positive 25. 11 plus 25 is 36. Okay, so we can see where this is going since that's a perfect square number. Okay, so this is a perfect square trinomial. It's got a minus sign in the front, so I know I'm going to have a minus sign. When I factor it, square root of the first term, square root of the last term, and just make sure when you multiply them together and times 2, they equal the middle term. X times negative 5 times 2 is negative 10. Great. So lastly, square root, this cancels. X minus 5 equals positive or negative 6. X equals positive or negative 6 plus 5. And I separate. X equals 6 plus 5, or X equals negative 6 plus 5. And last but not least, X equals 11, or X equals negative 1. So my solution set is going to be negative 1 comma 11. It's always the smallest number and then the biggest. So I hope that helped you a little bit solving completing the square. If you have any questions at all after you've rewatched the lesson video here in case you missed something, please reach out and I'm more than happy to help you.